Hello and welcome to my talk on recording carrion beetles. I'm Ashleigh Whiffin and I'm here to convince you that these are some of the best beetles. Why carrion beetles? Well, for me personally, I was introduced to this group when I was an undergraduate and I was studying forensic science, and my research project was looking at insect succession. So this is the patterns of insects that are attracted to carrion. And this was really the first time that I ever tried to identify insects. So carrion beetles were amongst my samples. And following this undergraduate degree, I fell in love with entomology, went on to do a master's, and subsequently gained a position at Edinburgh University, where I was working in a lab that were researching burying beetles. So burying beetles are a type of carrion beetle, and they have this incredible behaviour. And this is really where I first got to see this up close and in action. So a fantastic experience. Fast forward to present day, and I'm assistant curator of entomology at National Museum Scotland, so based in Edinburgh, and it's my job here to maintain and care for a collection of 2.5 million specimens, as well as going out and doing field work and adding to that collection. So of course I have some opportunity to go out and collect carrion beetles, as well as curating the carrion beetle collection that we have. And I also managed to sneak in a little bit of research on carrion beetles too. So it's very much features in my job, but because I can't quite get enough of these insects, I do volunteer some of my time to this group as well. So in my spare time with my brilliant colleagues, Matthew Esch and Richard Wright, we co-organise the National Silphidae Recording Scheme. So we've been doing this since 2016, and Richard produced a fantastic identification resource for us. And then it's myself and Matt that really work to promote the scheme. We do this through social media, of course. Usually we're able to host identification workshops in person, which is great fun. I'm sorry that we can't be there to do that for you today, but hopefully in the future we will be able to resume doing these things. And it's really our aim to just recruit as many people to record these beetles as possible. We are verifiers on iRecord, but we also accept records through other means as well. So what I'm going to do for you today is share my passion for these beetles, tell you a bit more about how to identify some of the common species and how to trap them, and send us your records. Now, obviously, I'm pretty biased because I do believe that these beetles are some of the best insects. The family Silphidae is quite small, and globally there's only about 200 species. And recorded from Britain and Ireland, we just have 21, so it's a nice small family. But despite its size, it's quite a diverse little group. You have the iconic species that are known for burying carrion and exhibiting these elaborate parental care behaviours. And then we've also got some predators in the group too, and even some that are phytophagous. So quite a nice mix. But the carrion beetles, the true carrion beetles associated with decaying matter, they are incredibly important for our environment. They're vital decomposers, which means that they help break down and recycle all the nutrients that are contained within dead animals. And this really helps to maintain a healthy environment. And their association with dead things means that they also have applications in forensic science, that I mentioned before. And they're just really cool. They have quite a long fossil record. So the ancestor of today's carrion beetles were around 165 million years ago. And this means that they were probably responsible for the decomposition and recycling of early mammals and dinosaurs. So what's not to like about this group? So we'll kick off by looking at the necrophorus species. So these are the true necrophagous beetles. They feed on carrion, that's animal carcasses, and they go by two common names generally: burying beetles, which is a very obvious one that indicates their behaviour of burying the carrion that they encounter, or sexton beetles. And a sexton is typically an officer of the church that would be responsible for maintaining the church buildings and also the graveyard. So we have that association there of really being an undertaker, a caretaker for the dead, which is very much the case with these. So these species, they will locate a small dead animal, perhaps a bird or a mouse, and they will work to bury it. And they're doing that because of the high level of competition around this resource. So carrion, large animal carrion, is an extremely nutrient-rich but ephemeral resource. And it's quite scarce, it's quite limited in our landscape, so the competition is really high. So by burying it, they're eliminating some of their competition. And the adults are equipped with pretty strong mandibles, so they are able to also predate on any rivals, any insect eggs or larvae that have been laid by their competitors. They are able to dispatch those. Now, I mentioned they possess these fascinating behaviours. This is biparental care. So what this means is that both male and female will work together to care for their offspring. And this is quite unusual amongst insects. And it involves quite a few different tactics. You have the process of the burying. So what they'll do is they'll use their broad heads and their strong front tarsi to excavate soil from under the carcass, slowly sinking that down into the ground and concealing it. They then will strip the fur or feathers off the corpse and kind of mould it into a ball shape till it looks something like this. So this was a dead mouse on the left-hand side here. And if this clip works for me, you should see an adult beetle here tending to its offspring. So they've prepared this carcass and it doesn't look too pleasant, does it? But what they've also done is, after all the fur and feathers have been removed, they apply some secretions. So these oral and anal secretions contain antibacterial properties. This actually helps to preserve the carcass for longer, so it slows down that decomposition. And that's because this is food for their offspring. Some brand new research, though, has shown that these secretions not only act as a preservative, but it's also acting as a repellent. So there's some chemicals in these secretions that deter competing burying beetles, which is absolutely fantastic. So they've prepared this carcass. The parents have laid eggs in the soil nearby, and when these eggs hatch into larvae, the larvae instinctively come to the top of the carcass, where the parents have created this kind of crater, this nest. And then when sitting in the nest, the larvae are tended to by the parents. So male and female will feed on the flesh of the carcass, and they will regurgitate pre-digested food to the offspring, which is just charming, isn't it? So here we go. Here is a mother beetle feeding her offspring. There's also some communication that goes on here. So the larvae aren't able to vocalise at all, but they do beg. So larvae can request more food by raising their legs and touching their parents on the face. This is their form of begging. The parents are able to communicate too, and they do this by stridulation. So we know that stridulation is common across some insect groups. For the beetles, they have a particular way of doing this. You might notice that on the centre of the abdomen here, there's a couple of parallel lines, and this forms a stridulatory file, series of ridges, and on the underside of the elytra, their wing cases, there's some hairs. So what happens is when the beetle moves its abdomen in and out past the wing cases, these hairs move past the stridulatory file, acting as like a plectrum and producing a sound. So if you disturb carrion and you hear a squeaking noise, this is the beetle stridulating. What's even more fascinating is there's actually 3 types of stridulation to be known to exist within these beetles. You have the defensive stridulation. Whack your volume up at this point so that you can hear this clip that I've put in for you. Hopefully you can hear it. It's very, very squeaky. I'll play that one again for you. think it's fair to assume that this is the defensive stridulation. Obviously, they're doing this to ward off any predators. The second type of stridulation is the courtship stridulation, so they are producing a sound to attract a mate. And thirdly, they have the parental stridulation as well. So the beetle larvae go through 3 instars, and in the later instars, the larvae are able to self-feed. So they may be moving around the corpse, and the parents can signal to the young that it's time to come back, it's dinner time. Now, when you find these carrion beetles, you may also notice that they have some hitchhikers. That's right, they have phoretic mites quite often. It's generally believed that this is a symbiotic relationship and that the beetles actually benefit by hosting these mites. However, it's not quite clear. The general thought is that the beetles, the mites will hitch a lift on the beetles because they know that the beetles are headed to carrion. And when at the carrion, these mites will jump off and feed on any fly eggs and larvae that are present. So obviously this would be helping the beetle by reducing some of that competition. However, these mites have also been proven to potentially feed on the beetle eggs too. So obviously that would be pretty detrimental to them. And you can also sometimes see beetles that are completely overloaded with these mites. So potentially there's going to be some issues with fitness for the beetles. But don't be too concerned when you encounter these, it's pretty normal. So just want to use this moment to point you towards the free identification resource that we have. So if you head over to the UK Beetle Recording website, you'll find our page there with a PDF link to download the free identification key. And you can also follow us on Twitter at Silphidae UK. And let's just look at those key features to help you recognise a carrion beetle. So they're really quite great for beginners, these beetles. They're pretty large as far as beetles in the UK go, and they've got pretty discernible features. So things that make them a carrion beetle is the fact that they have these 10 or 11 segmented antennae, and if they're a burying beetle, they've got these strong clubs. They're generally quite dark in colour, occasionally with the red markings. They have truncated wing cases, so quite often you'll be able to see some of the abdominal segments exposed. And if we were looking at tarsal formation, the burying beetles and other carrion beetles have 5-5-5, which means that each tarsi, each leg is made up of these 5 smaller segments at the end. But generally, once you get your eye in, you will notice whether you are recognising a carrion beetle or a burying beetle. So the true burying beetles, these are the Necrophorini, and they have the clubbed antennae. And the other subfamily is the Silphini, and they have more thread-like antennae, and it may be gradually expanding towards the tip, but never with a really strong, distinct club. So looking at the antennae is the way that you can separate these two out. So we'll start by looking at those burying beetles. They've all got the clubbed antennae. One that you can immediately recognise in the UK is Necrophorus humator, and this is one we've called the undertaker. It's one of our most common and widespread species that we have. It's very difficult to confuse this with any others. It has no orange markings, it's entirely black, and it has orange clubs to the antenna. It's crepuscular, so it's active at dusk and into the evening. And it's kind of just becoming active right now. We're in April at the moment, so it's about to peak soon. Moth trappers beware, you're about to be completely invaded by these beetles. It's also one of our largest species. Then how to separate those with orange markings? Well, the most easy one to look at first and to eliminate is those that have black antennal clubs. So those will be Necrophorus vespiloides. It's the only one that's got orange markings that has black antennal clubs. It's also the one that is most likely to be encountered during the day. So this is a species that will fly on warm sunny days. It's a really strong active flyer. So it's found between March to November, and it's very widely distributed. Then we've got 4 left. We tend to group Vestigator and Vespillo together. They have golden hairs present on their pronotum. So if you look at those, you will notice lots of lovely golden hairs there. But the key difference to split these two is the shape of the hind legs. So Vespillo has lovely curved hind tibia. So those hind legs, the back legs, are lovely and curved, and we've hence given it the common name, the bent-legged burying beetle. I like to think of it as kind of the cowboy of the carrion beetles. It's got that cowboy stance. It's scarcer in Scotland and Ireland, but this is a species that's widespread across England. and active between May to September. A really lovely species to look out for. It's very, very hairy. So then to split the other two species that don't have any golden hairs on their pronotum is to look at the markings and also their abdominal segments. So firstly, kicking off with Interruptus. This is the interrupted burying beetle, given that name because the top banding on the elytra, those top orange banding, is usually interrupted, so it's widely separated. But this is a variable character, so it's really important to then use the secondary feature, which is the hairs on the abdominal segments. And for Interruptus, there should be golden hairs on the abdominal segments. You're less likely to encounter this one. It's nationally scarce. It's got strongholds in the southeast of England and is active between April to December, but peaks around about July time. So one to look out for, but it is commonly confused with investigator. Now, as I mentioned, usually the markings of the elytra, the top banding there is one of the features, but I've put two pictures here to show you that this is a variable feature. So one thing to do to make absolute certain that you have investigator over Interruptus is to look at the abdominal segments and what colour hairs you have there. So for investigator, you only have golden hairs on the very tip of the abdomen and the rest of the hairs are dark. So it's one to look out for. It's common and widespread, so investigator is seen across the UK and active between April to October, but it peaks in August. And this is one that is a late summer breeder. So for this species, the offspring overwinter as pre-pupa and will complete their development the following spring. Another feature of this species is that the second banding on the elytra actually looks a little bit like a pair of Scotty dogs. We don't put that in the identification key though. So moving to the other half of the family, which is the Silphini, they have the thread-like antennae. Remember, they don't have the distinct club. Here's a little overview so you can kind of get a feel for the general shape of the subfamily. And the most frequently encountered in moth traps is this one. This is Necrodes littoralis, and it's really large. It's actually a good sized male is bigger than some of the burying beetle species that we have. It's got the common name the shore sexton beetle because previously it was thought to have an association and be quite coastal. We now know that that's not the case with many strongholds inland, and it's quite common and widespread across the UK, active from around about May through to October. And we can tell males and females apart for this species because the males have really chunky hind legs. Quite an interesting record of the shore sexton beetle is from Edinburgh, where I'm based, and at the Botanic Gardens here, when they had a corpse flower blooming, the rotten smell from this plant attracted a female of this species, which is pretty exciting. I'm quite sure the only record of a corpse flower attracting a carrion beetle in the UK. Just wanted to mention that this is a species that's commonly confused with the undertaker. And that's because they're both black and they both have orange tips to the antenna, but really the key thing to look at is the shape of the antenna, so that they are very strongly clubbed with the burying beetle. Some other species that you might encounter, much smaller in size, are the Thanatophilus. So mostly you're more likely to see Thanatophilus rugosus or sinuatus because Thanatophilus dispar is scarce. Then you separate rugosus and sinuatus by the structure of their wing cases, the sculpturation on there. So rugosus you can see is really wrinkly and lumpy bumpy, whereas sinuatus is nice and smooth between the ridges. And also sinuatus has this feature which we call a shoulder tooth. So it has this little pointy sharp bit on the shoulder of the elytra, which helps you separate it from both rugosus and also dispar if you were to encounter that species. Now I mentioned that some members of the group aren't associated with carrion at all. So now we're going to look at some of those predatory species. Phosphouga atrata is one that you're bound to encounter at some point. This is the common snail hunter, and it comes in two colour forms. It comes in red and black, and these two colour forms can occur together. It's very widespread and common, but particularly it likes woodland areas. It predates on snails, and it has a fantastic way of doing this I'll just go back to the other photo because this is my favourite photo of this species. You can see it has a really nice elongate narrow head, and it uses that to access the mollusk within the shell, but it also has another adaptation in that it bites the foot of the mollusk and reduces digestive enzymes to help break down that flesh so that it can then just drink it up. It's a pretty fierce predator. It is active between April and September, but the most easiest time to find this is during the winter, checking under bark, under fallen logs or under mossy blankets for this species. But please do make sure that you put any of the bark back if you're going to be removing it. A very similar species, Ablateria laevigata, also known as the smooth snail hunter. You can see there that it is very smooth compared to Atrata. It doesn't have those really strong ridges on the elytra, and it also has quite a domed pronotum. Again, it has a skinny, narrow head though, so it's going to be accessing the mollusk prey, and it's active between April and September, but it's a southern species. It's only found in southern England, and it likes open habitats, typically sand dunes, quarries, gravel pits, and we've got quite a few records of it just wandering about on paths and things. Possibly my favourite of the predators though is Dendroxina quadrimaculata, and this is just a beautiful species. This one's a caterpillar hunter, so no mollusks for this one. It is usually found on oak trees or on hawthorn and is hunting the caterpillars of moths. It's an early spring species, so it's active between April through to July, and it's nationally scarce. So this is one that we're really interested in getting people out looking for more of these. So if you're willing to go out and beat some oak trees to try and find this species this spring, we'd be very, very grateful. And I'm just adding in one of the vegetarian species. This is the golden beet carrion beetle. So it's phytophagous and it feeds on sugar beet and other similar plants. Both the adults and larvae will feed on the plant material, and I absolutely love this species because it looks like a little teddy bear. It's covered in dense golden hairs, and once you catch it in the sunlight, it shimmers. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's another species that is nationally scarce, and this one also kind of has a bit of a coastal distribution because it really likes sand dune areas. It's univoltine, so just has one brood per year, and is definitely one to be looking out for in the spring and summer. Another species that's pretty widespread, but it is very fond of woodlands, is Aesioptoma thoraxicum. This is the red-breasted carrion beetle, but it's not too fussy on what it eats. So it will go on carrion, it will also go on dung, and it has a particular fondness for the stinkhorn fungus. Lovely picture here. Active April through to August. It's one of the most frequent carrion beetles in the north of England and Scotland. But it is pretty much found everywhere else, apart from the Isle of Man and Ireland. I also just wanted to mention sylphid larvae. Now, as you can see from these two photos here, the two subfamilies are equally as different at the larval stage as they are at the adult stage. The Necrophorini, so the burying beetle larvae, they're cream in colour, they're quite squishy looking, and that's because they are underground, they are cared for by the parents, nice and protected, but the Silphine larvae are not. There's no parental care that goes on there. Eggs are laid directly on the carcass and they develop en masse on the carcass, defending themselves, or they're predatory, so they're moving about searching for prey. So they are much more sclerotized than the Necrophorini, and to be a bit more robust. They're quite difficult to identify, and that's something that I'd like to work on, producing an identification guide for the British species. So do get in touch if you think you find some of these. So how can we find these beetles? As we've mentioned, carrion's a pretty scarce resource. So quite often the best way to find them is to trap for them. You can inspect any carrion that you do encounter. I would say please be very cautious, be very road safe, and also carry a pair of gloves with you because you shouldn't be touching carrion with bare hands, she says. Really terrible example for you there. The easiest thing, if you don't want to get too messy and you don't really want to put any dead things out or rotting meat, is run a light trap. So many of our species in the UK are attracted to light. So here you go, here's a little summary for those that are attracted to light. It's a really easy way to record these beetles. So you can moth trap, or you can do some of the carrion trapping. So you can bury some carrion, or you can place it in a pitfall trap so that you have a baited pitfall trap. An example here for you. This is a mouse suspended over a pitfall trap so that the beetles are drawn into the scent of the carrion and fall into the cup there. You can also do a passive pitfall trap because that will you'll maybe capture some of the non-carrion feeders such as the common snail hunter and perhaps Silphitristis too. So don't worry if you don't want to be putting any dead mice out. You can also do hanging traps because the burying beetles in particular are really strong flyers, so they are capable of locating hanging carrion. You can buy fancy traps or you can construct your own, or even just a simple yogurt pot with the bait in hanging from a tree. One thing I would recommend is that if you're doing any of these trapping, if you're doing live trapping, give the beetles a bit of coverage within the pitfall trap, maybe some soil, some leaf litter, a bit of sand, just to protect themselves from the other beetles because they can be predatory and you don't want to check your trap the next day to find that you've just got one very hungry beetle that's eaten all the others. Now, most importantly, if you do trap for or find any of these beetles, is to record your sightings. Now, we are big supporters of iRecord. Obviously, Matt and I are verifiers for iRecord, and we just think this is a fantastic way of recording your sightings and for us to aggregate all the records. It really is a great tool for enabling research and decision making at local and national levels. It allows everyone to make a contribution to science, and it's really, really, really simple to use. So definitely recommend giving it a go. You can download the app, have that one on your phone. And if you're ever unsure of identifications, you're very welcome to contact us directly before you submit your sightings. But we are verifiers on this, so we will be able to help you through the platform as well. It's really helpful for us if you include record shots, and the ideal record shot would be from above so that you can capture all these features here. Importantly, the antenna, so we want to know what colour they are. We want to see if there's any hairs on the thorax. We want to see the patterning on the elytra, shape of the back legs and the tergites. It's not much to ask for, is it? But we know how tricky that these beetles can be. Once you get them in a pot, they're running about and it can be quite tricky to get a photo. But don't worry, if you only get a blurry photo, still submit that one to us too. We can see what we need from this photo here. You can see that this is Necrophorus vespillo. So the key is really just to take multiple photos from different angles. We can even tell when the mites are completely overwhelming the beetle. We can usually still work out what it is. So this is another Necrophorus vespillo, that's that bent-legged carrion beetle, and you can just make out the hind tibia there. It's nice and curved, but we've seen so many of these beetles now, we really, we know what we're looking out for. And these records are really, really important for us when assessing the conservation of this group. So it's with thanks to historic data and current data that we are able to make these assessments. The historic data is really, really important because for some species we know that they're likely extinct now or are critically endangered. An example of that is Silphidae carinata. So this is one that was last recorded from Great Ridge Wood in Wiltshire. And we know the exact location thanks to historic records in collections. So we have been able to go back to these sites to survey for it to see if it's still there. Unfortunately, we haven't had any luck yet, but we are going to persist. It was last recorded in 1985, so we're still hopeful. But it's not all bad news. Last year, my colleague Steve Lane did an assessment of the status of the sylphids in Britain and found that actually for one species, Thanatophilus dispar, it was slightly better news. So this species is one that's believed to be associated with carrion at lock edges. It went extreme declines in its distribution. It was previously found in England, but now it's only known from Scotland and Ireland, where it has a couple of strongholds. But where it is found, it seems to be doing quite well. So this species, which was previously listed as endangered, is now considered vulnerable. So slightly better news. So you can help these beetles by recording them. That's the first and easiest thing that you can do, whether that's just the the odd ad hoc record, or if you're going to be doing some specific trapping for them, you can send us your records, and it's really going to help us learn more about any changes in the species distribution, ultimately learn more about the specific habitat requirements that these species have, and help to conserve them. Some tips that I'd have is definitely avoid any pesticide use or adding any poisons into the environment, and let the beetles carry on, really. Let nature do its thing. So if you find any carrion, especially if it's in your own back garden or something, let it be. Be a bystander, watch it happen, but let nature do its thing. Don't prevent access to the carrion. And then, of course, get in touch. If you find any larvae, I'd be really excited to hear from you. Take sorts of photos, or potentially, if you're willing to, collect and voucher specimens for me to help with the production of the identification guide. I also have to get in a cheeky plug for our brand new book as well. So I'm really proud to have collaborated with Steve Lane and Colin Lucas on this. This is a brand new atlas out at the beginning of this year on the Hysterids, Sporoids and Sylphids of Britain and Ireland. So it's a distribution atlas, but it's a little bit more than that. It's also got identification keys to the 3 families, extensive notes on the biology and ecology of these, and then, of course, lots of lovely maps with dots on, and notes on the conservation status of them. So yeah, a fantastic piece, really proud to have been involved in this, but we couldn't have done it without all the incredible records, huge number of records, almost 50,000 records from our dedicated and passionate recorders. So thank you to them, and this is for you. If you want to learn more and more about these 2 groups, have a look at that. Hopefully once you've tackled the sylphids, hysterids will be a nice step up for you. So thank you very much for tuning in to my talk today. I just need to say a few thank yous. There are many, but particularly to my co-organisers, Matt and Richard, and the wonderful team at the Biological Records Centre who have supported and helped facilitate the recording scheme. A special thank you to my co-authors, Steve and Colin, and a big thank you to all our wonderful recorders, and particularly those that have allowed me to use their images today. So I hope you will join the Carrion Club. If you've got any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to get in touch. You can reach out via email or through the Recording Scheme webpage or via Twitter. And all that's left to say is keep calm, carry on recording.